Maya Rourke had driven 6 straight hours through endless stretches of forest and fog before the neon sign for Blackwater Motel finally flickered into view. The letters buzzed weakly, as if they hadn't been fully alive in years. She slowed her car, feeling a strange pressure settle in her chest, the kind she always felt when she was close to a story worth chasing. The motel sat on the edge of a marsh that stretched into darkness. Tall reeds swayed even though the air was still, and the surface of the water shivered like something beneath it was breathing. Maya had researched the place for weeks, chasing rumors of disappearances, ghost sightings, and a long-abandoned police investigation that never reached a conclusion. As she stepped out of her car, the air felt thick and damp, carrying a faint scent of algae and rust. The lonely building loomed over her, its paint peeling in long strips and its windows dusty enough to hide whatever was inside. A flicker of movement behind one of the curtains made her pause, though she couldn't tell if it was a person, or just her nerves tightening. She wasn't scared. Not yet. Maya had built her career by going exactly where she shouldn't: old factories, condemned houses, towns that tried to bury their secrets. The Blackwater Motel was just another mystery waiting to be peeled open, another chance to prove she was more than an online storyteller chasing myths. With her bag slung over her shoulder, Maya walked toward the front office door. The sign on the window read vacancy in faded red letters. As she reached for the handle, the wind whispered across the marsh behind her, soft, almost like a voice speaking her name. She turned sharply, scanning the reeds. Only silence answered. Mr. Grady appeared in the doorway before Maya could even ring the bell. He was tall, bony, and pale in a way that suggested he rarely stepped outside. His eyes were a washed-out gray, and they scanned Maya not with curiosity, but with the wary caution of someone evaluating a threat. He didn't smile. He didn't even greet her, just stared, as if he had been expecting her long before she arrived. When he finally stepped aside to let her in, his movements were stiff, almost mechanical. The lobby smelled faintly of dust and old wood polish, and a single lamp flickered in the corner as if struggling to stay awake. Grady slid the guest book across the counter with a slow, deliberate motion, his fingers tapping anxiously against the pages. Maya noticed that only a handful of names had been written down in the last year, and most of them had been crossed out. As she signed her name, Grady cleared his throat. "Just so you know," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "we don't encourage guests to wander around after dark. The marsh isn't safe at night." He watched her closely as he said it, as if gauging her reaction. But there was more in his tone than simple concern. It sounded like a warning rehearsed too many times. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Wild animals? Or something else?" she asked lightly, hoping he might slip and reveal more. But Grady pressed his lips thin and didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a brass key with the number 3 etched into it, refusing to meet her eyes. His hands trembled slightly, just enough for her to notice. As Maya turned to leave the lobby, Grady called out behind her, "People disappear when they go looking for things they shouldn't." She paused mid-step, but when she looked back, he was already facing away, pretending to sort through papers that didn't need sorting. The message was clear. At the Blackwater Motel, curiosity wasn't just dangerous. It was deadly. Maya made her way down the long, dimly lit hallway, the old carpet muffling her footsteps. The corridor felt strangely colder than the lobby, as though the air itself avoided this part of the building. As she passed each door, she noticed the numbers were worn and crooked, hanging from their screws like they were trying to slip away. But it was room 7 that made her stop. The door to room 7 was different, its frame splintered, its handle rusted, and thick, yellow police tape crisscrossing it in an X. The tape was old enough to be brittle, curled at the edges like it had been there for decades. Someone had once tried to tear it off, leaving jagged marks along the wood. The sight of it sent a ripple of curiosity through Maya's chest, stronger than she wanted to admit. She leaned closer, noticing faint scratches around the keyhole, like someone inside had tried to claw their way out. A cold draft seeped from underneath the door, carrying a smell that was hard to define, damp, metallic, almost like the walls were bleeding. For a moment, she thought she heard something shift inside, a tiny thump followed by silence. It made her breath hitch. Maya snapped a quick photo with her phone. A locked police-sealed room in a failing motel was exactly the type of detail her readers loved. But she wasn't here for clicks. She was here for answers. So she crouched, peering at the base of the door again. The cold air was steady, unnatural, almost as if Room 7 had its own weather system, sealed away from the rest of the world. Just as she reached out to gently test the doorknob, a shadow moved behind her. Maya turned sharply, but the hallway was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered. She stood and stepped back, the weight of that silent room pressing against her spine. One thing was certain. Whatever had happened in Room 7, someone, or something, didn't want it opened. That night, after unpacking her equipment and jotting a few notes, Maya stepped outside to get some fresh air. The motel's exterior lights were weak, casting shaky yellow circles that barely reached the pavement. Beyond them stretched the marsh, dark, endless, and unsettlingly silent. Even the insects seemed to avoid the place. Maya hugged her arms against the cold and listened, trying to convince herself the uneasy feeling was just fatigue. The marsh looked almost alive under the moonlight. Reeds shifted slowly, although there wasn't the slightest breeze. The water reflected nothing, not the sky, not the moon, not her own outline. It was like a black mirror swallowing all light. As she stared, a ripple broke across the surface, spreading out as if something had risen just below. She squinted, waiting for it to break again, but the water fell still. Then she heard it, a faint whisper floating toward her across the marsh. It was soft, fragile, like someone speaking from very far away. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but the sound grew sharper, more deliberate. It didn't sound like nature, it sounded like words. Her name. Maya. She froze, her pulse quickening as the whisper repeated, just slightly louder. She stepped backward toward the safety of the motel, eyes scanning the darkness. No shape emerged. No figure moved among the reeds. Yet the whisper curled around her like icy fingers, brushing the back of her neck. She told herself it had to be her imagination, her brain filling in gaps, turning shadows into ghosts. But the sound didn't stop. It followed her, bending with her steps, faint but persistent. When she reached her room door, the whisper finally faded into nothingness. Maya stood there a moment, hand on the doorknob, trying to steady her breathing. She'd chased dozens of legends in forgotten towns, but none had ever called her by name. Whatever lived in the marsh wasn't just watching. It wanted her attention. Back inside her room, Maya tried to shake off the lingering chill from the marsh. She set up her laptop on the small desk, intending to review her notes, but something on the nightstand caught her attention, a folded, yellowing newspaper she was certain hadn't been there before. Dust coated the surface of the table, but the paper itself was clean, as if someone had placed it there only moments earlier. She unfolded it carefully. The headline read, "Local woman vanishes without a trace, authorities stumped." The date was from 30 years ago. Beneath the headline was a grainy black and white photo of a young woman with long dark hair and cautious eyes. Her name was Lena Hawthorne, the last known person to disappear near the Blackwater Motel. Someone had drawn a crude red circle around her face, the ink faded but unmistakable. Maya's heart tightened. She had seen Lena's name mentioned in online forums, always connected to the motel, always shrouded in rumor. But finding this article here, placed deliberately in her room, felt like an invitation. Or a threat. She scanned the columns, noting that Lena had been staying in room 7 when she vanished. The police found no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no leads. She simply stepped out of existence. A small note was scribbled in the margin in shaky handwriting, "She heard them too." Maya frowned. The message didn't match the rest of the printed article, someone had added it later, possibly much later. The ink was smeared, like it had been written by a trembling hand. The words sent a shiver along Maya's spine. Was this a warning from a previous guest? A clue left behind? Or the ramblings of someone who'd been driven mad by the motel's whispers? Just then, a soft creak came from the hallway, followed by silence. Maya looked toward the door, a prickling sensation crawling across her skin. Whoever left the newspaper wanted her to see it. And now, she suspected, they were still close. Lena Hawthorne may have vanished 30 years ago. But her story at Blackwater Motel wasn't finished. Sleep was impossible after the discovery of the old newspaper. Maya kept replaying the scribbled message. She heard them too. The words gnawed at her thoughts, fueling a restless curiosity. As dawn crept over the marsh in pale shades of grey, Maya grabbed her flashlight and stepped outside. The morning air was thick, heavy with the scent of stagnant water. She needed answers, and the marsh seemed like the only place they might be hiding. Following a trail of half-sunken stones behind the motel, she noticed something unusual: footprints in the soft mud. They weren't fresh, but recent enough to keep their shape. Some pointed toward the marsh, but others led back toward the motel itself, stopping abruptly near a cluster of overgrown reeds. Maya pushed the plants aside and discovered a square patch of ground that looked wrong, flattened, unnaturally even, like something had been placed or dragged over it. She knelt and brushed away the mud. Beneath it was an old wooden hatch, swollen from moisture and camouflaged by years of neglect. The metal ring used to lift it was rusty but intact. With a deep breath, Maya pulled. The hatch groaned open, releasing a cold gust of air that smelled of earth and something older, almost like time itself had been sealed inside. Her flashlight beam revealed a narrow ladder leading into darkness. Heart pounding, she descended carefully. The wood creaked under her weight, sounding unnervingly loud in the confined space. At the bottom lay a cramped underground passage, its walls reinforced with rotting planks. Water dripped from above, echoing through the tunnel with a hollow, rhythmic sound. The air was frigid, colder than the night air outside, and each breath fogged in front of her. As she followed the tunnel deeper, the space widened slightly, just enough for her to realize where it led. Her light fell on a ladder rising toward a familiar spot, directly beneath room 7. Maya stared upward, her pulse quickening. Whatever happened to Lena Hawthorne didn't begin in the room. It started down here. In the silence beneath Blackwater Motel. Maya climbed the ladder slowly, each rung vibrating under her hands as if resisting her touch. When she reached the top, she pressed her shoulder against the hatch above and pushed. It lifted with a reluctant groan, releasing a faint puff of cold air, far colder than any room should be. She emerged inside room 7, stepping into a darkness that felt thick, almost heavy. Her flashlight flickered once before steadying, its beam slicing through the stale air. The room looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry decades ago. The wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips, revealing rock-blackened wood beneath. Furniture lay overturned, and old clothes, yellowed with age, were strewn across the floor like relics of a vanished life. What drew her attention most were the drawings on the walls, childlike sketches made with something that wasn't quite ink. They showed faces twisted in fear, marsh reeds curling like fingers, and dark shapes rising from the water. A cluster of cassette tapes sat on the nightstand, coated in dust except for one that looked recently moved. Maya picked it up carefully, noticing a faded label, "Keep Out the Noise." Her stomach tightened. She hesitated only a second before slipping it into the ancient tape recorder beside it. When she pressed play, a wave of static filled the room, followed by a faint rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat buried beneath water. Then came a voice, trembling, whispering about the marsh calling, about voices that never stop. As the tape played, the air around her shifted. A soft sound, almost too quiet to hear, rose from the walls themselves. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the tape. It was whispering. The same whisper she heard outside, only louder, more intimate. It slid along the back of her neck and curled near her ear. Maya whipped around, flashlight flashing across the room, but nothing moved. The shadows held still, though they felt alive. Then she saw it, scratched into the far wall, hidden behind a fallen dresser. Words carved by desperate hands. "Don't listen." Her breath caught. The tape recorder continued to hiss and crackle behind her, the whispering rising, pressing in from all sides. Maya backed toward the hatch, heart racing. One thing was certain now, whatever haunted room 7 wasn't memory. It was still here. Listening back. Maya's hands trembled as she stopped the recorder. The whispering faded, but the room still felt charged, like the air was vibrating with something waiting to be heard. She scanned the desk where the tapes had been, noticing a torn folder shoved beneath it. She pulled it free and dust billowed into the air, stinging her eyes. Inside were brittle papers, diagrams, and handwritten notes signed with familiar initials, C. Grady. Her pulse quickened. The motel manager wasn't just hiding something, he had been studying it. She flipped through the pages. They were filled with references to frequency anomalies, auditory distortion zones, and marsh resonance patterns. Some diagrams mapped the marsh like a living organism, its veins drawn as channels of energy converging under the motel. One page detailed experiments involving sound waves, exposure lengths, and behavioral responses. Maya's stomach twisted as she realized the subjects weren't animals, they were people. Volunteers who were never recorded as leaving. One letter, dated almost 30 years ago, mentioned Lena Hawthorne by name. It described her as highly sensitive to the marsh resonance, the perfect candidate for the final phase of the Grady family's research. The author claimed the marsh produced a living frequency, a voice that fed on fear, pulling susceptible minds into its depths. Anyone who heard the whispers too long became overwhelmed, drawn toward the water like sleepwalkers. Maya felt sick. Grady hadn't been warning guests out of concern, he was protecting the secret his family had created and failed to control. The disappearances were not random tragedies, they were casualties of an obsession passed down through generations. And if the whispering was growing stronger now, it meant the marsh was waking again, hungry for a new voice. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Maya snapped the folder shut. Shadows shifted under the door as someone paused outside. Her breath caught. If Grady knew she had uncovered the truth, he wouldn't let her walk out of room 7 alive. Maya backed away from the door, clutching the folder to her chest as the shadow outside lingered. Then, suddenly, the whispering returned, first as a faint murmur, then rising like a slow tide. But this time it wasn't drifting from the marsh. It was coming from inside the room. The walls vibrated with soft, rhythmic pulses, each one echoing through her bones. The voice wasn't calling her name anymore, now it was speaking in fragmented sentences she couldn't fully understand, like a language half-formed, half-remembered. Her flashlight flickered again, the beam trembling as though the air itself was interfering with it. The temperature plummeted so fast her breath became visible, drifting in pale clouds. Maya's heartbeat pounded in her ears as the whispering shifted into something sharper, angrier. Her vision blurred at the edges as shadows in the corners of room 7 stretched unnaturally, pulling away from the walls like they were peeling themselves loose. Then came the force, an invisible pressure squeezing her skull, pushing thoughts into her mind that weren't hers. Images flashed, Lena stumbling through the tunnel, the marsh rippling with unnatural movement, Grady watching from the shoreline with terror rather than control. The whispers surged, now a chorus instead of a single voice. It felt like dozens, maybe hundreds, pressing into her mind, begging, warning, pleading. Some voices cried for help. Others wanted her to join them. The pressure became unbearable. Maya fell to her knees, her palms pressed to the rotting floorboards as the shadows surged closer. They curled around her like tendrils of smoke, reaching for her throat, her face, her ears. The room tilted, spinning in a dizzying blur. The whispers grew into a scream, shrill, violent, and deafening. It felt like the marsh itself was inside her head, dragging her consciousness toward the water, pulling her into the same void that had swallowed those before her. Just when the darkness was about to consume her, Maya mustered every last ounce of strength and groped blindly for the cassette recorder. Her fingers closed around it. She lifted it and slammed it against the floor. It shattered. Instantly, the scream cut off, replaced by a suffocating silence that rang louder than the noise before it. The shadows froze, then slowly retreated like smoke being sucked back into unseen cracks. The marsh had lost its grip. But only for now. Maya staggered to her feet, lungs burning as the last traces of the whispering faded into the rotten wood of room 7. The silence was almost disorienting, too sudden, too complete. She steadied herself against the wall, the broken cassette recorder at her feet like a slain creature. The air felt lighter now, but not safe. Nothing about the motel felt safe anymore. She shoved the folder of Grady's research into her bag, knowing it was the only proof of what she'd just endured. She rushed toward the door and pulled it open. The hallway was empty, but the air carried a lingering heaviness, like the building itself was holding its breath. Maya moved quickly, her footsteps nearly soundless against the threadbare carpet. Each passing door felt like an eye watching her. When she reached the lobby, she saw the guest book still open on the counter, her name written crisply on the last line, beneath rows of scratched-out entries. She resisted the urge to tear out the page and fled outside. The morning light was dull and washed out, bleeding weakly through the marsh fog. Maya sprinted to her car, fumbling with her keys as her heart hammered in her chest. Every sound made her flinch, the rustle of reeds, the groan of the motel sign, the soft drip of water somewhere behind her. She finally got the door open and threw herself inside, slamming the lock down with shaking fingers. The engine roared to life, its rumble grounding her, reminding her she was still alive. As she sped down the narrow road away from the motel, the Blackwater marsh stretched endlessly in her rearview mirror, still, dark, and silent. But for a moment, just before the motel disappeared from sight, she thought she saw someone standing near the edge of the water. A woman. Hair dripping, head tilted, watching her leave. Maya blinked, and the figure vanished into the mist as though it had never been there at all. Hours later, when she stopped to catch her breath at a gas station miles away, something cold crawled down her spine. She checked her backseat, half expecting to find shadows waiting for her. But it was empty. Still, the unease didn't fade. And far away, back at the Blackwater Motel, the camera in the hallway flickered on. Room 7's door, sealed for decades, slowly creaked open, on its own. The whispers had gone silent. But the marsh was only waiting for the next voice it could claim. Months after exposing the motel, Maya receives a package with no return address. Inside is a cassette tape labeled Phase 2. The tape is warm. And something inside the box moves.